Hello everyone, it is Matt, and today I'm going to be filming a June wrap-up. So in June I read 11 books, and it was a pretty good reading month. I liked pretty much everything I read except for 2 books. But before we get started, I have one question for you guys. So I want to film a series of videos diving into the history of the Malazan world, and so I wrote a script for a video talking about kind of the 4 founding races and the history of the world, from the Kachin Shamal all the way up into the Aerosol, the Jagut, Twanimas, just covering the 4 founding races up until and including the Tist invasion. And I want to know if that's something that you guys want to see, because I filmed the video, I got about 65-70% of the way through it before my camera died, and that footage was already 52 minutes long. So these videos are going to be very long, and if none of you guys want to watch that, then I'm not going to bother. So let me know down below what you guys think. If you guys have an opinion, like maybe I should make a lot of videos that are just much shorter rather than like 3-4 very long ones, let me know. But yeah, I just thought it was really interesting. And the reason that I am kind of excited about it is because I want to cover the difference in a series of events in between the main Malazan books and the Carcanis trilogy that we get, because those 2 versions of history are very, very, very different, and there's a lot of conflicting information and contradictions in there. So I just think it's super interesting, and if you guys want to see that, I would be willing to do that for you. So let me know. So, the worst book that I read in the month of June was The Unholy Consult, which is book 4 in the Aspect Emperor series, which is itself a sequel series to The Prince of Nothing by R. Scott Baker. The first book being The Darkness That Comes Before. That's a trilogy. It's a very, very interesting trilogy that is very much like Malazan in how just like deep and intense the world building is. And I absolutely adore the first trilogy. I think it's really good. The only real issue that I have with it is the sexual violence towards women is a lot. It's bad. It gives me incel vibes. Not that I'm saying Baker's an incel, but then he has a sequel series, and that series was just very, very hard to me. The first book was good. The second book was okay. The third book, called The Great Ordeal, was a great ordeal. It was a slog of slogs, if you will. And so reading the 4th book, I originally tried to do maybe like 2 years ago, and I just could not bring myself to do it. But eventually, I decided to give it another shot, and so I did that in June. And I did finish the book, and there were certainly some cinematic and interesting moments in it at the end, but it just couldn't, I don't know, I just really lost the spark when I started disliking the series 2 years ago. And reading the 4th book just didn't really reignite that spark in me, and so it was just very, very difficult to get through. The series is so incredibly dense, and for the majority of the book I felt like nothing was happening. And then the end was very, very good. The battle on Golgotha was super epic, but the ending was confusing, for one, and 2, the ending is the beginning of the second apocalypse. So the way it ends isn't actually a conclusion to the story, and so I assume Baker's writing another trilogy talking about the actual second apocalypse. But yeah, I'll probably try reading the first book without whenever, if ever it comes out. I think he's having an issue with the publishing of it. But yeah, it just was not good for me. So I gave that like 1.5, 2 stars. The other book that I read this month that I didn't particularly like was Hyperion by Dan Simmons. I had heard Brittany raving about this book. I know that she absolutely loved it. And I've seen some other people talking about it. I've just kind of heard some buzz around on BookTube. And so I decided to pick it up because it is, of course, a classic. And I was very, very intrigued by the idea of the story. But then the further I got into it, the more kind of frustrated I got with it, because in my mind, I feel like Dan Simmons wrote like six different short stories that were all kind of within the same realm, within the same world. But then he was like, well, shit, how do I monetize this? Better make some kind of through plot that brings it all together into one book so I can, make money. That's kind of how I felt when I was reading the book, which I'm sure is not the case. But the book is basically telling the story of a group of pilgrims going to the world of Hyperion to visit the time tombs. And on the planet, there's a god called the Shrike. And that's what the story is about. But each chapter, they're long chapters, basically tells the story of one of the people there, and kind of how they got to this point in the pilgrimage or whatever. So it was really just like 6 different short stories, and I only liked 2 of them, so that's not great. Lamia Braun, hers is very, very interesting, and then the most fascinating one, obviously, is the priest, talking about the cruciform and that weird immortal parasite. The imagery of the one priest being like staked to these lightning trees and still being alive after all this time was super, super cool. But aside from that, I didn't really like the book very much. And the ending drove me crazy, because if you're telling a story about people going on a pilgrimage to visit the time tombs, you're telling a story of A to Z, why end the book on Y? Literally, why? That's my question. Why do you end it right before you get to the time tombs? Like, it was just very frustrating when I got to the end of it. I was like, well, then what is this for? So I didn't like that either. I gave it, I guess, 2 stars. I didn't rate it, but 2 stars feels right and feels appropriate. Next up, I read The Midnight Library, which was a book that I had seen and I was vaguely intrigued by it, but the only reason I read it is because I made a new friend, an old friend? I don't know. My best friend's friend came over, and I hadn't seen her for like 10 years. Turns out she really likes reading, and so the 2 of us decided to buddy read the book The Midnight Library. And this was a book that grabbed me from the very first chapter, because it starts with something like 26 hours before Nora Reed decided to die. And the first chapter is kind of counting down up until Nora decides to commit suicide. And then the book is basically Nora hovering in between life and death. In between life and death, there's this place called the Midnight Library. And for as long as you stay there, you are just surrounded by this library of books. And you can pick books off of the shelf, and these books are all the different lives that you could have possibly led. And so the book basically just goes through kind of all the possibilities of Nora's life. It goes through her living out the lives where she undoes all of her regrets. And the rule is, as soon as you begin to feel dissatisfied with the life that you are now transported into, you get taken out of it and sucked back to the Midnight Library to pick another book and try again. And that, I think, is a super fascinating concept. I really, really liked it. And if you guys want to know what my idea of heaven is, it truly is a library. I would love to die and just wake up in a library surrounded with books filled with just all of the true information of the world and anything that has ever happened. Like, if I could just pick a book off of the shelf and know the ins and outs of the life of Empress Theodora, that would be fascinating. And so the concept of a library, kind of between life and death or after death, is super cool. And overall, I really liked the book. I liked the message of it, and I gave it 4 stars. Next up, let's talk about... I think that's called The Torch That Ignites the Stars, I believe, by Andrew Rowe. Whatever it's called, it's the 3rd book in the Sufficiently Advanced Magic series. And that is a series that I really, really like, because an issue that I think you guys know that I have is I don't like lit RPG, and I hate cultivation stories because they're so tired and worn out and tropey. I cannot stand them. But I do like books that feel like a video game. So this is a series that I really enjoy because it's not people waking up inside of a video game. This is just a fantasy world where people get what are called attunements that have basically different types of magic, and we're following these students as they go to school to learn about their magic. We learn about like their mana usage and how they level up, and they go into these things called spires, which are massive towers that are basically just like video game dungeons. And so it's not an actual lit RPG, but it does feel very much like a video game in how it is, in how the world is constructed, basically. And so I really, really like this series overall, but an issue that I am getting with Andrew Rowe is he dives too deeply, in my opinion, into the magic system. I know that there are people out there who love magic systems. I myself am one of them, but I think you get to a point where you are just getting so deep into the tiny little minutiae ins and outs of how the magic works that it's detracting from the story. And he has another series, I believe the first book is like The War of Broken Mirrors or something like that. And I liked that series too. It had a different interesting magic system, and it takes place within the same world. We actually see a crossover character, or two crossover characters. But I recently, or a couple months ago, tried to read the newly released third book in that series called Defying Destiny, and that book got so deep into the magic that I basically just felt like I was like in a classroom reading a textbook of magical theory, and it was an issue. And now that we are on the third book of this series, I feel like he is kind of getting to that same point. I feel like he should actually cut back a little bit on the magic system. But overall, I really, really like the book. I would still give it 4 stars. I think it is super fun, and it's pretty fast-paced. So it's just kind of like brain candy that is good for a fun time. Or if you are a fan of the Cradle series by Will White, I have told you guys I love that series. I believe that you would also like Sufficiently Advanced Magic. And yeah, if you're a lit RPG fan, cultivation fan, whatever, I think that you would like that. Also, if you're a fan of those, check out the book Iron Prince. This is a book that I reviewed ages ago. But I never posted it or edited it. And I should probably do that because I adored that book. It was fabulous. Next up, let's talk about Master of Sorrows. This is a book that I believe that I tried to read a while ago and didn't get into. I put it down. Or no, I had an arc of it. Yeah, I had an arc. This time I got the audiobook, and that made it easier because I didn't have to sit and focus on something that I wasn't that into. I could do other things. And so as I kept listening to it, I got into it more and more. But this series follows a character, and he lives in this small, secluded village that basically has kind of like a priesthood. So this is basically kind of like a magical school story. We are following this boy as he's training to fight and dealing with bullies in his class and his friends and whatnot. But they're all training to become avatars of judgment, which are people who go out into the wider world to retrieve or steal magical artifacts to bring back to this monastery to lock away in the Vault of Damnation. Because magic in this world is forbidden, and there's a whole religious reason. And based on the religion, there's the belief that anyone who is born with any sort of deformity or impairment is cursed. And so it's very ableist, honestly. And so anyone born with any sort of deformity is cursed by this evil god and has to be stoned to death. And this boy was actually born without an arm, but his mentor stole a mechanical magical arm from the Vault of Damnation that attaches to his real one. It's a prosthetic that completely matches. No one can tell. And so this boy's hiding a secret while training with the people who would kill him if they found out. Along with that, there's a prophecy, as there always is. And yeah, overall, I did enjoy this book. I think I would give it like a 3.75. 3.5 seems a little bit too low, but it's also not the best thing I've ever read. Overall, it was just an enjoyable, fun time. I do think that a lot of you guys would like it and that it's worth picking up. And the second book is already out. I downloaded it, I started it, but then got distracted by some other things. So I will get to that this month. Next up, let's talk about 3 rereads. So Brian Staveley is an author who I really love. I adore. I adore Skullsworn. I think this book is brilliant. I absolutely love it, and I feel like it deserves some more hype and praise. And also, Flaptraps is by far my favorite cover artist. This dude is incredible. I love his art style. Anyway, Brian Staveley is coming out with a new book this month, I believe tomorrow or the day after. And in preparation for the book, I decided that I wanted to reread the main trilogy. And so this month I reread both The Emperor's Blades, Book 1 in the Chronicles of the Unhewn Throne, and Book 2, Providence of Fire. And I'm going to get to The Last Mortal Bond soon, after I finish the new Malazan book. But aren't these covers incredible? They're so beautiful. So anyway, I reread the first 2 books there, and I really enjoyed them just as much as I did the first time, really. This book is following 3 royal siblings. They are the children of the Emperor, and the Emperor has just been murdered. The daughter, who I thought in my head was named Adea, because the narrator, back in the day when I first read the series, is British and they don't pronounce the R's. But her name is actually Adare. The daughter Adea lives in the capital, and she is basically kind of like a finance minister, and she has kind of all the political savvy and training. The other 2 kids are Valen and Caden. And Caden is the heir to the throne, and because of that, he is sent to live with these monks way up north, and the monks are training him in basically kind of like this mental meditation technique, and he doesn't quite understand why, but it turns out it's very, very important. And then along with that, we have my favorite character, Valen, and Valen is training to be a Ketral. Ketral ride gigantic birds called Ketral, and they are kind of like they're marines basically. And so he's on this island training with kind of all of his classmates to become Ketral, and there is a death, and there is some murdery stuff going on over there in the Kirin Islands. And so Valen is dealing with that while also finishing up his training, and he's basically about to be promoted to a full Ketral. And yeah, those are kind of the 3 storylines that we're following. And the series is fantastic. It is super fast-paced. It is so fun, and I really like the characterization. And Valen is a great character. He's my boy. He's the best one. And so I'm super excited to read the follow-up series, The Empire's Ruin. I know that the main character is basically Valen's best friend, and so I'm excited to see some familiar faces. Oh, I lied. Valen is the second best character. The best character, by far, is Pyr. Pyr is incredible. She's an assassin. She is a Skullsworn. She worships the god Ananshel, the god of death, and I love her. Brilliant. So those were 2 of the rereads, the third one being Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I think Agent Tchaikovsky is one of the best SFF authors out there currently writing. He is incredible. He is one of the most imaginative authors I've ever seen, and Children of Time deserves all of the praise it receives, and even more, honestly. So Children of Time is a 6-star book. It is so good. And basically the concept is, it is far in the future. There is a group of scientists doing what is called the exaltation of beasts. And they have created a nanovirus that they can infect monkeys with. And it will greatly, greatly, greatly speed up evolution. So these monkeys will basically become intelligent enough to communicate with us and help us or whatever. And so this group of scientists is far away, far off, on a terraformed planet, and they're about to release the virus into these monkeys and seed these monkeys all over the terraformed planet. People back on Earth, on the other hand, there's a huge faction that deems the exaltation of beasts a huge sin, and they hate it. And so basically a coordinated terrorist attack goes off on Earth, and at the same time, there are secret terrorists on the ship, and the whole ship gets destroyed, and the virus does get released onto the planet, but the monkeys burn up in the atmosphere. And so this virus gets released into all of the insects that have seeded this world. And the story follows generation after generation of spiders as they become increasingly intelligent and start forming their own super complex social society. And the sheer imagination that this author has, and the way that these spiders are able to innovate and do super technologically advanced things, is so fascinating. They are able to manipulate the pheromones of ants, and they use massive, gigantic ant colonies as computers, which is so cool. And this book is just incredible. But along with the whole spider story, we also get refugees who, years after the destruction of Earth, have fled Earth, and they've arrived on this terraformed planet to settle it, and they are not allowed onto the planet because circling the planet is a satellite in which the main scientist who was performing this experiment, she is kept in fugue, basically circling the planet, asking the planet questions that eventually she wants her monkeys to respond to. And she has been circling so long, and she has gone basically insane, and she won't let these refugees land on her planet. And so it's a whole big deal. There's a lot of drama, and it is an incredible series. And so another 5-star book, also by Agent Tchaikovsky, is one that came out this month called Shards of Earth. This is his new sci-fi book. I was super excited for it, but a little bit hesitant after Doors of Eden, which was, I think, released last year or the year before. That was a good book, but it wasn't incredible in the way that Children of Time and some of his other books are. And so Shards of Earth actually lived up to my expectations. I really, really enjoyed it. Basically, 80 years ago, there was a war with some kind of weird alien intelligence that humanity has called the Architects. And these Architects, they show up, they are able to manipulate reality in this weird way, and they destroy these planets, but in the process turn them into these kind of beautiful structures that look like flowers and stuff. And so that's why humanity calls them the Architects. 80 years ago, there was a war with them. Humanity created these people called Ints, and Ints are able to somehow kind of mentally communicate with these Architects, and they're what drove the Architects away 80 years ago. Most of the Ints, or all of the Ints, suffered extreme trauma in being created, and a lot of them, the majority of them, are dead. But there is kind of one main original Int who's left over, and he is still alive 80 years later. He looks exactly the same, and he has not slept in 80 years. And he is able to pilot ships through unspace, which is kind of this extra dimensional way to get around the universe. And we are basically following him and his crew, and an old person he knew from the war, as they deal with what seems to be an architect coming back. And so there's a whole lot of politics in this book. There's a lot of action-packed fights. It is incredible. It is so fast-paced, it's so fun, and it's so interesting and imaginative, and I love this author more than almost anything. So that was another 5-star book. I feel like this video is getting long. I'm sorry, you guys. We still have a couple more to talk about. Yeah, we have 2 more books. So next up is another space opera. This is called Catalyst Gate by Megan E. O'Keefe. I have a video, I believe, from about this time last year where I had a fantastic reading month where I read like 5-star books back to back to back. And 2 of them were the first 2 books in this Protectorate trilogy by Megan O'Keefe. And the first book is called Velocity Weapon. The second book is called Chaos Vector. And the premise for the series is that there are 2 siblings, and they are basically separated by time. Buren is the brother. He is training to become a keeper. The keepers are the highest caste and the politicians of the society. And keepers have a chip basically embedded in their skull that houses some kind of secrets. And so he is dealing with a political situation, and he wants to get his sister back because some ships have been destroyed. And Buren wants to get his sister back because she is a gun captain, and a whole bunch of soldiers kind of out in space have been attacked and destroyed, and he wants to go look for survivors, basically. The other perspective we get is his sister Sanda Grieve. She is the gun captain, and she wakes up out of a fugue chamber evacuation escape pod. Her ship exploded. She was catapulted out into space, and she's basically been in this pod, and it's like 237 years later or something. And she wakes up aboard this weird ship with not a soul on it, but the ship has a very weird artificial intelligence controlling it, and it's an enemy ship as well. And that's kind of how the story starts. That's what it's about, but things progress in a very, very interesting direction. And the further you get into the book and into book 2, the crazier things get. And it is an explosive, action-packed, super fun series that also gave me an idea for a recipe that I still want to make. But yeah, the first 2 books in that were 5 stars, absolutely incredible. This book was super fantastic, and I think I would have given it 5 stars if it had been out back when I read the first 2 and I'd been able to binge read all 3 in a row. But because it had been over a year, my excitement for the series had kind of died down a little bit, and also I had forgotten some things from the previous books. And so reading book 3, I could have used a recap in the beginning of the book. That would have been nice. But reading book 3, it was still super fun. It was fantastic. It was so interesting, and I did still love it, but I would give this 4.5 stars instead of the 5 that I gave the first 2. So I would definitely check out that series as well if you want a super fun, action-packed space opera. It's great. And the last book we have to talk about is Gay. I read it in June because of Pride, obviously, and this book is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. I previously tried to read her book Empire of Sand, and I got probably a third into it, and I just was not vibing with it. I didn't really like it that much, and so I put it down. And so I was a little hesitant to pick this up, and in chapter 1, I almost put it down. I was extremely hesitant to keep going, because in the book, there's something called the Rot. And the Rot is basically a fantasy version of Tree Man Syndrome, and I have like a a thing with skin and irregular bumps and stuff like that. And if you guys don't know what Tree Man Syndrome is, I need you to open up a new tab, write in Tree Man Syndrome, cover your eyes, hit enter, just peep through them and look at the picture for 1 second and then close the tab. I am not joking when I tell you that I don't really dream, but occasionally I have nightmares, and the only nightmare I ever have, it's a recurring one, is about slowly becoming a tree man. And so Fantasy Tree Man Syndrome was hard for me to get past. I was struggling with it a lot in the beginning of the book, but eventually I got past it and it was fine. Anyway, this book is primarily following two women. There's a woman named Melanie and a woman named something else. And Melanie is a princess. Her brother has become emperor. He's a crazy religious zealot, and he basically exiles her for not doing something. And so she's exiled to this kind of far away rebellious province, and she is imprisoned in this old kind of magical temple. The other girl we're following, I need to find her name. The other character we are following, Priya, she is holding onto a secret. The secret is that she actually used to be one of the temple children, but maybe like 15, 20 years ago, there was a huge event where all of the priests from the temple gathered up all of the children and they all killed themselves in a mass suicide. And we're not exactly sure why, but Priya is one of the only ones who kind of escaped. And within this temple, there's something called the Deathless Waters. These children are raised within the temple and they are put into the Deathless Waters, and some of them return, and when they return, they have powers. Some of them die as well. And you are ritually put into this water 3 times. The once-born have the least amount of power, and the thrice-born eventually kind of become leaders of this religious magical temple. And yes, so these people, these firstborn, twice-born, thrice-born, they are able to kind of control nature and plants. And it is very, very interesting, their powers. I think it's very cool. It's not something that I've really seen a lot, or maybe ever, in other magic systems. And so I did enjoy that. But yeah, we are following Melanie as she's exiled into this temple, and then we're following Priya, who has now come back to this temple, and she's basically tasked to be Melanie's handmaid. And this whole province is a very rebellious province. They still believe in their magic. They're also having a kind of famine and health crisis because there is the rot, like I mentioned. And the rot is infecting lots of people. It's blighting crops. It's killing animals. And so it's a very big deal. And they want to rebel, but they are under the rule of this despotic empire. And so we're following these two women as Priya tries to keep her secret, as Melanie gets out of her drug-induced stupor and starts to kind of take political action. And it's also gay as well. It's not a romance-based story whatsoever, but there is definitely a romance between Melanie and Priya. And yeah, it was just a really good book. Along with that, we do get some other characters. There is kind of like an exiled prince named Rao. There is another temple child named Bhumika. And yeah, there's some other characters as well. But overall, it was a really, really good book. I did enjoy it once I got past the little Tree Man Syndrome thing. And I'm glad that I finished it and stuck with it, because it was about like a 4.25 star, 4.5 star book. I enjoyed it overall, and yeah, I would definitely recommend it to you guys, especially if you're looking for something a little bit queer. Anyway, I feel like this video is like 40 minutes long, so I'm gonna end it here. I hope you liked the video. Click that like button down below. Let me know what you think, if there are any of these that you want to pick up, and if there are any books that you think that I should read. Also, I would like an answer about that whole Malazan history video idea. So let me know how you guys feel about that, and have a good one, guys. Bye.